If you've got a Bible with you, if you want to turn to Mark chapter 5, we're going to read from verses 1 to 20. Mark chapter 5, 1 to 20. It's a bit of background. Jesus and his disciples have just been caught in this storm, and Jesus has just stilled the storm. They're heading across the lake. And then we read at the start of chapter 5, they went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man had lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons of his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me. For Jesus had said to him, Come out of this man, you impure spirit. Then Jesus asked him, What is your name? My name is Legion, he replied, for we are many. And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them. He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank and into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and the countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. And when they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man. They told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus was getting in the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. So that's our passage for this morning. What we're going to be looking at is Jesus' power. I think generally we're naturally suspicious of powerful people. People who have power and authority, generally as human beings, we're suspicious of people like that. We don't trust them. There's something innate in us as humans. We don't want to be mastered or come under the authority of other people. We know there's something about power that seems to turn people rotten. Lord Acton famously said that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Maybe we wouldn't put it that eloquently, but we have phrases that suggest what happens when people have power, that they turn. We say things like the power has gone to his head. Instinctively, we are just suspicious of people who have power. And at this point in Mark's Gospel, Mark 4 and chapter 5, what's coming to the fore is that Jesus is someone who has power. Jesus has power like no one else has power. But what we also see is that Jesus holds this power without even a hint of corruption. All that Jesus uses this power for is for good, to serve others. Jesus uses his power to serve others. We see him healing people, raising people from the dead, calming the storm, and he uses his power for good. And perhaps we see Jesus' power most clearly not in these miracles that he does, but in the fact that he sets his face resolutely towards the cross and without faltering goes towards the cross to die for sinners. In Corinthians, Paul writes that we see the power of God most clearly in the cross, that the cross shows us the power of God and the wisdom of God. And as we think about Jesus' power, we don't really have this category of someone who holds power absolutely, but holds it in such a way that he's only ever used for good. And when you read through Mark's Gospel, you'll find there's two things that are two questions really that are asked that Mark is wanting his readers to ask. And the first one is who is Jesus? That's the first question that comes very clearly through Mark's Gospel. Who is Jesus? Who is this man? I read on a blog recently, someone was commenting about the Gospels. How should we read the Gospels? And he wrote, the Gospels have much to say to me, but they aren't about me. The Gospels aren't about me, they are about Jesus. And we need to listen to them and master them, or better still, be mastered by them and the Jesus they describe. So when we come to the Gospels, a big question in Mark's Gospel is, who is Jesus? And the other question that comes up over and over again is how are we going to respond to Jesus? We see all sorts of people in Mark's Gospel meeting Jesus and all sorts of differing responses to Jesus. And so that's what we're going to see in our passage this morning, these two things. Who is Jesus and how should we respond to Jesus? In our passage, we see Jesus as one who powerfully delivers. Jesus is one who brings powerful deliverance. And what we also see in our passage is this kind of polarized response where we see two categories of people and the response to Jesus are absolute opposites. Absolute opposites. So we're going to see powerful deliverance and a polarized response. Let's look firstly at those first few verses. So Jesus comes across the lake, and as soon as his boat touches the shore, it seems like he's confronted by this wild man. And there's one thing that's clear about this wild man, he's utterly dominated. He's utterly dominated. This man is dominated. He has this unclean spirit, and this unclean spirit just holds absolute dominion over him. And yet there's a bit of a paradox. It seems like, in one sense, this man is really free. If you look there, Mark makes a big deal. This man can't be chained. You know, they keep trying to... The people round about in the community are scared stiff of this man. He's utterly wild. He's uncontrollable. He seems to have this superhuman strength, and every time they chain him up, he breaks the chains. They cannot control him. At one level, he's free. He has this strength. The men of the village, they come, you can imagine, with the pitchforks, a bit like on Shrek. And they come out and they're trying to hunt this guy down and tie him up. And every time they think they've got him under control, he just breaks free. At one level, he can do what he wants. And yet, what does he do with his freedom? He spends his freedom just in the tombs, this horrible, unclean place full of rotten flesh and dead men's bones. And he spends it night and day just crying out in torment. It's a miserable picture. So at one level he's free, he's got this strength, no one can chain him. But the other level, he's utterly dominated. All he spends his freedom doing is wretched stuff, night and day crying out in torment among the tombs. And if you want a picture of the power of this man's domination, you just have to look at these 2,000 pigs hurtling off the cliff edge. Probably most of you here have worked with livestock at some point. I don't know if anyone's worked with pigs. I've never got not much experience with pigs. But if you want an animal to do something, just one animal, say you've got a cow that's got out of the field and you're trying to get that cow to go back through the gate. Sometimes you can need 4 or 5 or 6 people just to do that, to get one animal to go where you want it. It takes a lot of people. So when we see 2,000 pigs hurtling down a cliff into a sea, I mean, I presume, pigs aren't, they don't like the water, they don't like swimming, they don't want to go in the sea. So when we see 2,000 of them running down the cliff and just drowning themselves in the sea, you see something of the power and dominion that this legion of demons had on this man. It's a really miserable picture. He's utterly dominated by these demons. And it's also quite a dramatic picture, isn't it? I mean, this feels a bit far removed from our day-to-day experience. This man who is just uncontrollable and wild, and I doubt if you go down into Arkholme, and you're probably not going to meet this man. You might, I don't know, but you're probably not going to meet this man. It seems a very dramatic picture of the control of these dark powers on this man's life. And there'd be some that would say, oh, come on, you don't expect us to believe this, do you? This just doesn't happen. Come on, demons, this is the 21st century. We don't believe in that kind of stuff now, do we? And yet, when we open our newspapers, we see descriptions of people's lives who are a dramatic display of evil. And we don't have answers for this in our materialistic culture. We don't have answers for these people who do unspeakable things that we just cannot even begin to understand. We don't have answers for that. C.S. Lewis famously said that there are two equal and opposite errors into which our race fall about devils. One is to disbelieve in their existence, and the other is to believe and feel an unhealthy or excessive interest in them. The devils themselves are equally happy with both. They hail the materialist and the sorcerer with the same delight. So C.S. Lewis is saying when we think about demons and devils, we can fall into two traps. One is to just say, they just don't exist. The other one is to become obsessed with them and sort of captivated by them. And as we look at this man, this dominated man, this miserable picture, we do well to remember just because all of the devil's domination isn't this dramatic, it still is very real. And the power that the devil and his cronies hold in this world, even though it doesn't always display itself in dramatic displays like this, it's still equally as real. In Ephesians in chapter 2, we have this description of humanity. It says that we're following the course of this world. We're doing what we're told by the prince of darkness. And that's exactly what we see for this guy here. He is under the dominion of Satan. And it's dramatic and it's real. And for the whole of the human race, our Bible tells us that we're under the dominion of Satan. In our natural state, we are dominated by dark powers. We follow our own sinful desires. We have no other option. When we do what we do, we're merely following the script that the devil has written for us in our natural state. And so what we see in this man here is a picture of the human race. Yes, it's not always this dramatic, but it is always this real, the domination that Satan holds on this world. Each one of us is horribly corrupted by our sinful desires. At one level, we think we're free. We can do what we want. At another level, we're utterly bound to pursue our passions and our desires. That's the picture that our Bible paints of the human race. So in this man's domination, in his miserable state, we see something of our miserable state as human beings, that we are under the power of the devil. We are held slavery by our own sinful natures. But then comes this man's deliverance. The boat touches the shore. This man seems to be drawn toward Jesus. And just get the picture now. There's this man there. He's hardly wearing any clothes. He's wild. He's probably not shaved. He's probably not cut his hair. He's covered in scratches. He smells. The whole place is horrible. And then you've got Jesus saying, it seems as the story unfolds that the advantage is all with this demon-oppressed man. That he has the advantage. Jesus and his disciples are now in Gentile territory. So for them, that's an unclean place. They're in an unclean place anyway because it's this dead, full of tombs and dead men's bones. And then as Jesus begins to speak to this demon-oppressed man, and he speaks to the legion and asks the legion his name, we realize that this demon is called Legion because they're many. Legion of soldiers was around the 6,000 mark. So probably, this man is oppressed and possessed by many demons. Up on the hill, there's a herd of pigs. So again, unclean for the Jewish people. And it seems like everything's stacked against Jesus. And then there's just Jesus on this side, and all this darkness and oppression and power on the other side. And as this contest begins, you think, the man has the advantage. He's on the home turf. And yet we see Jesus, the contest is really no contest for Jesus. Jesus, as he approaches the man, he just says to the demon, come out of him. Come out of him. That's all he says. This contest that seems like Jesus has no chance. All Jesus has to say is, come out of him. And the demon, we read, he's begging, don't hurt me, don't torment me. He has to ask for permission to go in to the pigs. Jesus has absolute power over the powers of darkness. Sometimes we fall into this trap of thinking God is on one side and Satan and the dark powers on the other side, and there's an almighty battle going on, and it's going to be a close call, and we don't know who's going to win. That's not what we see here. We see Jesus has absolute power to deliver. And we know that this power that Jesus has comes from the cross. Just a couple of chapters earlier, in Mark chapter 3, the Pharisees are accusing Jesus. Jesus had already been casting out some demons, and the Pharisees accuse Jesus of casting out demons by Satan's power. They say of Jesus, you're of the devil. You cast out these demons in the power of the devil. And Jesus does that famous line, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And Jesus said, I cast out these demons because first the strong man, meaning the devil, has been bound, and now I go in and plunder his goods. So Jesus can bring this deliverance because he's first bound the devil, the strong man, and he goes in, and this is Jesus plundering the devil's house. This is Jesus robbing the devil's house. We read in Colossians chapter 2 that at the cross, Jesus disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing. That's what happened at the cross, that at the cross Jesus triumphed over all the powers of darkness. So that's why Jesus can simply say to this legion, come out of him, and it has to absolutely obey. And Jesus gives them permission, and these pigs hurtle down the cliff and drown themselves in the sea. I don't understand fully why this happened. Why did Jesus give them permission to go into the pigs? Why did all these pigs have to drown in the sea? I'm not sure. I think in this destruction of the pigs, we see something of the destructive nature of the devil, what he wants to do, that the thief comes to kill and steal and destroy. That's what the devil does. Like I said before, we see something of the power of the dominion that this demon had. I think also it highlights to us that these 2,000 pigs are of lesser value than the soul of this one man. That for this one man mattered more to Jesus than these 2,000 pigs. And maybe for the people there, this man was just a kind of an outcast from society. They wanted him penned away where they could just deal with him and then they could get on with what they were doing. But Jesus maybe comes to them and shows them that this man is worth more than these 2,000 pigs. But I'm not really sure exactly why there had to be 2,000 pigs killed. But let's not miss the point with all these questions. Why did Jesus have to ask the man's name? Was that important? Did he need to know the name of the demon before he cast it out? I'm not sure. Let's not miss the main point of this passage, that Jesus has absolute power. That this is just no contest. And I want us to see this picture of Jesus, that he's not someone who's struggling to win a battle. He has absolute power to deliver. It's just no contest here in Mark chapter 5. And just 4 applications that come out of this picture of Jesus, the powerful deliverer. Maybe you're here this morning and you have more in common with this demon-possessed man than you care to admit. You know something of what it means to be enslaved by sin. You cannot even live up to your own standards, let alone God's standards. You know something of what it means to just be driven along by your passions and not being able to do anything else. I want you to hear this morning and see this morning that Jesus is someone who is able to deliver absolutely and powerfully. And he would bid you to come to him and to receive him. Or maybe there's those of us who are Christians here who have prayed for a long time for loved ones or friends or colleagues who we know. And maybe we just think, how can God deliver them? They seem to be so blinded. They seem to be so dominated by a worldview that is godless. They seem to be so under the devil's power. They seem to be caught with, materialism or whatever. And we think, how can they see? How can they see who Jesus is? Just see here that this is no contest for Jesus. He delivers powerfully. And let that fuel our prayers and our efforts to share the gospel with them. That Jesus is one who is able to deliver. And for those of us, again, who are Christians, as we seek to live in the light of what Jesus has done for us, as in the words of Hebrews 12, we seek to run the race set before us, and we seek to put off those weights and those sins that seem to cling so closely to us. And sometimes it seems like an almighty battle. Let's remember we do it looking to Jesus, the Jesus that we meet in the Gospels, the Jesus who is strong and able to deliver. I just want this morning, the main point is to see Jesus, that he's able to deliver and it's no contest, and to love him and to delight in him. And finally, as we, not finally, don't think I'm finished, that was final application from this point. As we think about God's kingdom, in these miracles that we see of Jesus, we see something of what it's like when the king reigns. So when Jesus heals the sick, when he raises the dead, when he delivers people from demons, we see what it's like when the king reigns, a little snapshot of what God's kingdom is going to be like when it's fully realized. And we know that at the moment we live between the kingdoms. We are in God's kingdom now if we are his children. But we also live in this present evil age. We're kind of in the overlap. And God's kingdom is not yet fully realized. And as we live in this in-between times, we've got to remember that God's kingdom is not yet fully realized, not because God doesn't have the power to bring it in. Jesus has absolute power. And so as we look forward to God's kingdom and as we seek to live in this world now as his children, as we seek to deal and battle with sin, as we feel the effects of sickness and suffering and then death, we've got to remember that these circumstances, although they would seem to deny to us sometimes that Jesus is powerful, that's not the case. Jesus has absolute power and he's working out his purposes in his own time. So that's Jesus. Jesus brings powerful deliverance. What about the response that we see to Jesus? Let's get back to the story. These chaps on the hill who were looking after the pigs, they probably petrified at what their employers are going to say. They need a story of what's happened. They run back into town and they start to tell of this man Jesus, of the demons, of the pigs, maybe an excuse for the bosses of how the business has just collapsed in a matter of seconds. They go back and they tell in the town, in the countryside, everyone what has happened. And we read that all sorts of people come out to just see the evidence, see the pigs bobbing about in the sea. And as they get there, they see this man. The thing that stands out to them is this man. This man who they used to be utterly petrified of, he's now just sat there, fully clothed and in his right mind, and he's just sat there at Jesus' feet. And it's the transformation in this man that they cannot get over. And then we read that they were utterly afraid. They were utterly afraid. And I said we got a polarized response here. We see in these townspeople the first response, and they say to Jesus, "Go away." That's their response to Jesus and his powerful deliverance. They say, "Go away." They see this man and they're afraid. It's similar, if you just look back at chapter 4, the disciples are in the boat. There's this great storm going off and they're scared. And then Jesus calms the storm and you get this idea that they're even more scared now. They look at Jesus and they say, "Who is this man?" They were scared by the storm, but now Jesus has calmed the storm and now they're more scared of Jesus. And you get the sense that's what's going on here. Jesus, they were scared of this man, this wild man. Jesus come and just delivered this man and made him whole. And now they're even more scared of Jesus. When I was younger, we used to play sort of Saturday football. and you'd play in the league, and you'd get used to the teams that you would play in the league, so you knew them, and you'd play them. Every now and again, you'd play a cup competition, and you'd play in the cup competition teams that you weren't necessarily that familiar with. And so you'd be sat in the changing room before, and you go, does anyone know anything about this team that we're playing? And they would say, oh yeah, I heard they beat Blackpool Rovers 5-0 last week. And then you realise that the week before Blackpool Rovers beat you 10-0. And you're suddenly like, oh no, you've got this new dread about the game that's coming up, and you're adding up the scores and you're thinking this is going to be a 15-0. It's similar to that. Jesus here, they were scared of the man. Jesus has mastered the man, so they're more scared of Jesus. And they just say to Jesus, they say, you must go. They look at the man, they look at the pigs. They don't like what Jesus had done. It was like if they could, they would press the rewind button. You know, the pigs would come back up out of the sea, up the cliff, back into the pen. The demons would go back into the man. Jesus' disciples would go back over the sea, back to Israel. That's what the men of this village would do if they could. They just don't like what Jesus has done. They're scared of him. They see his power, and they see how he's used his power, and we read that they beg him to go. And that reminds us, doesn't it, if we're going to receive Jesus, we receive someone who has power. To receive Jesus is to bow to his rule. Often, sometimes we can find ourselves as Christians kidding ourselves that we're embracing Jesus when really all we want is his deliverance, but we don't really want his power. We maybe pay lip service to him as Lord, but really don't understand what that means. For these guys here, there was no chance of lip service. They'd seen Jesus' power, they knew who he was, and they knew that if he stayed, he was going to call the shots. And they don't like that. They ask him to go away. I think there's a very real danger that we make a Jesus in our own image. We have a Jesus who will come on board, sit in the passenger seat, and let us keep hold of the wheel, and maybe tell us some few nice stories along the journey to make things better. That's not who Jesus is. Jesus has absolute power. And if we receive him, we receive someone who is going to say, move over, take the passenger seat, and let me take the wheel. And these people here do not want Jesus. They say, go away. And that's a scary place to be. I don't know what your response is to Jesus this morning. But if you're paying lip service to Jesus, or you're saying to Jesus, go away, that's a scary place to be. Because we read in our Bibles, don't we, that there's coming a day when Jesus will return, and the whole of humanity is going to be divided into two groups. And there's going to be people on this side who have said, go away to Jesus. And we read that Jesus is going to say to them, depart from me, I never knew you. And that in that place, away from Jesus, they'll just be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So as we read this passage, we see that the go away response to Jesus is not the right response. What is the right response? The right response is to say, let me stay. As Jesus is getting back in the boat, he does what these people want. They say go away, they beg him to leave, and he gets back into the boat to leave. And as he's going away, this man who's been delivered runs up to him and he begs him. He begs him. We've had the demons begging him, we've had these village people begging him, and now the demon oppressed man is begging him. He says, let me stay. He says begging him that he might be with him. That's the words that were used in Mark 3 when Jesus calls the disciples. He called 12 disciples that they might be with him. So this man wants to be like the 13th disciple. He wants just to be near Jesus. He wants to be one of the 12. And I think the surprising thing here that Jesus has been given permission left, right and centre. He gives permission to the demons. He agrees with the request to get back into the boat and go across the lake. And yet here, he doesn't give this man permission. You would think to want to go with Jesus and be the 13th disciple would be a high aspiration. Jesus won't let him do it. Jesus does not permit him. Instead, he says, go back to your your hometown and tell everyone of what God's done for you and how he's had mercy on you. And even in that, we see something of what it means to say to Jesus, let me stay. When we say to Jesus, let me stay, it means living in obedience to him. That's what it means to say to Jesus, let me stay. It means to acknowledge that what Jesus says goes. We won't do that perfectly. That's not to say when we begin to follow Jesus that we live in perfect obedience. No, but we have a new heart to live under our new master. We may stumble at times, but we're not going that way anymore. We're now following Jesus. And the instruction to this man is to go home and to tell his friends. I think another thing that's strange in this passage is that if anyone's read much of the Gospels, you'll know that usually when Jesus does a miracle, he kind of goes, shh, don't tell anyone. You know, he casts out a demon and shh, don't tell anyone. He heals someone, shh, don't tell anyone. Or he doesn't let the demons speak because they're telling everyone who he is. And yet here he says to this man, go and tell everyone. It seems everywhere else he's telling people to be quiet. And I was a bit confused about this, and I got the commentaries out. And people generally, there's a consensus that because Jesus is now in Gentile territory, there's no danger of any kind of confusion about what he's come to do. So when Jesus is in Jerusalem, people are trying to set him up as king. They think he's come to establish this earthly rule and kingdom in the here and now. So he doesn't want people to be confused about who he is and what he's come to do. But for the Gentile people, there was no chance of messianic confusion, and all he wants is to get the gospel out there of what Jesus has done. And if we're his followers this morning, that's what he would instruct us to do. That's what he wants us to do, is simply go and tell the good news of what Jesus has done for us. That there was a time in history when God became man and died on a cross so that anyone who would trust him could receive forgiveness and become part of his kingdom. That's what we are to do as his followers. In fact, that's in 1 Peter or 2 Peter, that's why Peter says that the world keeps going. That's why we have another day tomorrow, God willing, so that the gospel can go out. We live in this age of grace where what's really happening is God is calling people to himself. He is delivering people from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light. That's why we have today. That's why, God willing, we'll have tomorrow, next week, the month after. That's what our world's all about. Our world isn't all about the rise and fall of empires, prominent people. That's not what our world is about. According to God's word, our world is about God saving for himself a people. That's why we have tomorrow, so that the gospel can go out. That brings a kind of a focus to our lives, doesn't it, of what our lives are meant to be about. There's things we've got to do out of necessity, the work, the feeding the kids, the sleeping, all the stuff that we have to do. But really, we have another day tomorrow so that the good news about Jesus can go out. So we're about done, but let's finish with a question I want you to think about over lunch. What are you saying to Jesus this morning? Are you saying to Jesus, go away? I don't want your power. I don't want your deliverance. Leave me to myself. I would just warn you, that is the worst thing you could do. You could make many bad decisions in life, but that is the worst decision you could make. Or are you saying to Jesus, let me stay? Let me be with you. Let me come under your rule. Let me love you and serve you. They're your only two options when it comes to Jesus. Jesus is God. Jesus is the one who has absolute power to deliver. And you've got those two options. You say, go away, or you say, let me stay. What are you saying this morning? We're going to come around the Lord's table shortly and remember what Jesus has done for us. Before we do, we're going to sing a song that kind of focuses us on the cross. We'll sing the first couple of verses, and then we'll come around the table and remember what Jesus has done.